This is PTV World. You are watching Fault Lines, and I am your host Syed Shabahat Ali. Kashmir Day is commemorated every year to remind world of its promises made to the people of Kashmir. The people of Kashmir are subject to violence and torture of worst kind. Our team has prepared a report to cover the recent activities in Kashmir. Watch this.
Abrogation of Article 370 and 35A sparked a wave of anger among the Kashmiris, Pakistanis, as well as the international community. The humanitarian violations have been recorded by the international media outlets, such as BBC and Al Jazeera, among numerous others. The internet blockade has caused an iron curtain of the new era to drop over the Kashmir Valley, cutting them off from the world and their loved ones. In the valley of 9 million Kashmiris, India has increased her military presence to about 700,000, making it the largest prison in the world. The people are unable to carry out their normal activities, nor are they able to utilize health, educational, or religious facilities freely. Since August the 5th, 2019, 308 civilians have been killed, 14,500 arrested, and 97 women molested. Moreover, demographic change has been actively taking place, where about 3.4 million non-Kashmiri Indians have been given domicile certificates. Not just this, coronavirus has brought Kashmir under a double lockdown. Approximately 135,000 Kashmiri citizens have been infected, with little to no health facilities available. According to a doctor, there's only one doctor available for about 70,000 patients in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Many international actors such as the European Union, United States Congress, France, Britain, Organization of Islamic Council's foreign ministerial meeting have all urged India to be answerable to the atrocities being committed in the valley. Yet, India does not pay heed. Despite Pakistan's loyal commitment to be the voice of the voiceless Kashmiris, it's a path we will have to continue to tread until enough pressure is exerted on India.
The people of Kashmir are still demanding their rights of freedom. A promise was made by the Indian government in the United Nations in 1949. A promise of plebiscite under watch of United Nations to allow the people of Kashmir to decide the fate and future of their state. But unfortunately, this promise has not been met. On the contrary, in August 2019, Article 370 and 35A of Indian Constitution has been revoked, depriving Kashmiris of their rights that were promised by the Constitution of India. See how CNN covered this event.
Message from Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi Thursday night, days after his government moved to tighten its grip on Indian-controlled Kashmir. On Monday, Modi's government took away the region's special status under the Indian Constitution, thereby stripping it of the power to set many of its own laws. It also downgraded Jammu and Kashmir state, which includes Indian-controlled Kashmir, to a union territory. This means that it will effectively be run directly by New Delhi. Indian states have much more power to direct their internal affairs. Speaking in Hindi, Modi defended all this by claiming that the downgrade was only temporary. He said local elections would be held, quote, soon, and said the changes would bring about development and help end terrorism. He even made a direct appeal to Bollywood, asking filmmakers to consider the mountains and valleys of what is one of the world's most heavily militarized regions as settings for future projects.
The two countries, India and Pakistan, have fought 3 full-scale wars on the issue of Kashmir. To add on to it, there have been more than 1,600 ceasefire violations made in the last year alone. And still, the people of Kashmir are looking for support from the international community. Prime Minister Imran Khan had highlighted the same problem in the United Nations General Assembly event, where he said,
in Kashmir, the world is not going to know, nor will the world understand that this is just the beginning. It's going to get worse. And there's a potential that 2 nuclear-armed countries will come face to face at some stage.
To join me in today's conversation, I have a prestigious guest from United Kingdom, Lord Nazir Ahmed from the House of Lords. Recently, he resigned from his position, but he is known to be an stalwart politician from United Kingdom who has worked enormously for the Kashmir's cause. Lord Sir, welcome to the program. My first question to you is why the global community has so far not identified the intensity of problem of Kashmir?
Sadly, the international community has its own interests and priorities. And because India is a very large country, it's very highly populated, and there's so much business potential with India, and therefore many countries do not want to upset India, even though now they know that this is a fascist regime, this is not a democracy, even though they know the abuses of human rights, not only in Kashmir, but against the Sikh farmers, against the minorities, the Muslims, and also the Dalits. But nevertheless, the international community remains silent.
Lord Nazir, do you think that the increasing ties between the United States and India is a major reason why we do not have enough attention from everywhere else in the world, why this problem is still not becoming a highlighted factor on the agenda of United Nations?
Yes, of course, the United States has its own interest. There is no such thing as human rights or rights of individuals or democracies, etc. United States looks after its own interests, and they know India is a huge market. And sadly, because the United States dominates the United Nations, and they fund it. United Nations is based in New York. So therefore, it has a lot of influence on the international organizations. And until we are able to move, things can change. And I think that things will change, because now China has influence, Russia has influence, Turkey, the Muslim bloc, the big 3-4 countries, I mean Iran, Pakistan, Turkey, Malaysia. If these countries back the Kashmiri people, then inshallah we'll be able to see some shift in the policy in Washington, D.C.
Lord Nazir, theoretically speaking, these humanitarian organizations of the world that work for improving the human indicators or the human development indicators in the world are primarily working out of the direct clutches of United Nations and United States. Why the humanitarian organizations have not done any specific work in this regard so far?
I don't think that they're silent. I think Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, United Nations Human Rights Council, they've all reported. But they don't have the power until there is political will, until you have the powerful countries like Europe and the United States backing these organizations on Kashmir. There are many other countries where, whether it's Rohingya, whether it is the Uyghur, whether it is the problems in Africa, all the countries are very careful in who they upset and what they suggest to the human rights organizations. But I think that they have spoken, but not strong enough. They need to send a clear message that the United Nations Security Council needs to impose sanctions. They need to withdraw diplomats. They need to put conditions on those responsible for abuses of human rights, take them to International Criminal Court. All these are options that I think people need to consider very seriously.
Lord Nazir, it is often said by some independent and neutral analysts that the Indian political system has been hijacked by BJP, and it has badly dented India's reputation as an independent state. What do you think of it? Do you think the damages done by the Modi regime to the reputation of India as a country, do you think these damages are reversible?
India is going to have very difficult time over the next a few years because everyone knows this fascist government, the Hindutva government has not only oppressed the Kashmiri people, but also look at the farmers, the Punjabi farmers. Look at what happened to the minorities, Dalits and other, Christians and other minorities. And of course, Kashmiris and the Muslims are at the forefront. The so-called democracy is not a democracy anymore. Those courts are very much controlled by the fascist movements. RSS, the BJP, and the Hindutva people, they are very much in control. And you know what happened to Europe when the Nazis rose, and what happened to the Jewish people as well as the Christian people. And it was about 1.7 million people from South Asia who came and stood alongside the Europeans to fight against the fascists of Germany, and that's how Hitler was defeated.
Lord Nazir, my last question. United Kingdom's Parliament has debated this issue many a time. They have discussed it at length. Tell us a bit about it. We at Pakistan do not know what has been outcome of all of these conversations.
UK Parliament has discussed Kashmir on a number of occasions, and there is a very strong lobby. There are committed members of Parliament and members of the House of Lords, those who are in the all-party parliamentary group, who have constantly raised the issue of Kashmir. They, because of COVID-19, because of the crisis in the world, now they've only been able to discuss matters inside British Parliament and also in constituencies. But hopefully when things get better, then these parliamentarians, in the past they've gone to European Parliament and they've gone to other parts of the world where they've lobbied, and inshallah they will continue because they are committed to the cause of Kashmir and the right of self-determination for the Kashmiri people, and the implementation of United Nations resolutions of 1948 and 49.
Thank you very much, Lord Nazir, for taking out your valuable time for this program. Ladies and gentlemen, keep watching. We'll join you after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to the program. I am now joined by Dr. Arsalan Khalid, who is focal person for the Prime Minister on social media. Dr. Khalid, welcome to the program and thank you very much for joining us. Tell me about this blockade of internet in Indian-held Kashmir. How do you think it is affecting the life of the people over there?
Thank you, Shubhat, for having me on the fault lines. Well, actually, what BJP-led Indian government did was to throw the 7 million people of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir into some kind of pre-internet era. So you can well imagine that this meant that 7 million people of the valley were disconnected from the rest of the world. So it's not only about suppressing their voices, it's about disrupting their whole lives. I mean, you can't even have any online information. You can't register for any online exam. You can't operate your online businesses. So, I mean, it's like even taking away the livelihood of people who depend upon internet for their livelihood. So it's like giving a message to these 7 million people that you don't even exist. But you see, what Modi-led government hasn't learned anything from this whole thing, and I mean, they are even repeating this formula in every place wherever they face any kind of problem. Recent example is the farmers' protest. They just repeated this practice and blocked the internet services in Delhi, and this was because they wanted to suppress the farmers' voice. They wanted to disrupt their protests. But this move actually backfired, because now the whole world is talking about the farmers' protest and everything. So this whole move of blocking internet whenever you face any problem is not a solution, and I think that Modi government is learning it the hard way.
Dr. Salan, we see that Indians have a very dominant role on the social media organizations. Organizations like Twitter, like Facebook, have been favoring India outrightly. And we are also facing this problem in the context of Kashmir. People are not allowed to tweet freely about Kashmir. You cannot use Facebook to more than a certain extent when you're talking about the rights of the people of Kashmir. You being the focal person to the Prime Minister on social media, how do you see this crisis?
Actually, now after the E-Disinfo Lab report, now everybody knows that all this narrative of India was based on lies and deceit. And while doing so, they were not only ethically wrong, they committed serious crimes. I mean, identity thefts, creating fake NGOs, creating fake news outlets, then regularly registering different domains of websites from where they pushed fake information. So actually, they had actually went so far that they even resurrected dead from their graves. I mean, this whole expose by the EU Disinfo Lab has actually shown the whole world that how for their fake narrative against Pakistan, and to hide their human rights violations in Kashmir, they created this whole network. It's just one network that's been explored. I mean, hundreds of other such fake networks must be operating. So, and the other thing about the Twitter banning content in Kashmir, well, this is a serious issue, and reportedly, some Indian accounts are actually taking credit for suspending Pakistani accounts. So, this is something very serious, and I had actually tweeted earlier that while official communication with the Twitter continues, I think Twitter on its own should explain that why these suspensions took place, and what's their policy on the content on Kashmir and such other areas. I mean, while we do understand the need for these SM companies to have a COC, I think the last thing that we would want is that the people voices start getting suppressed by and these SM companies. So, and this is something very important, and we are looking into it.
Dr. Salan, we understand that you are quite concerned about the situation, and we understand that the accounts of eminent Pakistani opinion makers had been blocked for a while by Twitter and by Facebook. But tell us what Pakistani government wants to do about it.
Well, I understand the concern of Pakistanis when they talk about Indian influence on the social media companies. We all are aware of the fact that India is a big market. They have, like, all the social media companies have their offices there. A lot of Indians are working at executive positions in these companies. But this shouldn't bother us as long as these social media companies remain neutral. They show no bias against Pakistan. And the last thing we want is that they start suppressing the voices of ordinary Pakistanis. So this is where the whole concern is, and these recent actions by Twitter, I mean, they are perceived as biased, and they are perceived by and ordinary users, because there is no explanation to it. Their comms teams have not issued any explanation that why they have done that. So these things actually raise concerns, and these are not even good for Twitter themselves. I mean, look, the perception actually makes the platform lose its credibility. I mean, Pakistan is the fifth biggest country in the world, population wise, and so potentially we can be the fifth biggest market for these companies. And if you just look at all other platforms like YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, they have grown considerably in last few years, but and the Twitter growth hasn't been that considerable. I mean, it's still 2 million, only 2 million users on Twitter, which is like nothing. So I mean, this is something that should be looked by the Twitter administration too. And I mean, they should actually also look at the role of the local representatives that they have kept in the UAE office, that what they are doing to improve the relation with the Pakistani government.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khalid. But one last question is about the options that we have at this moment. You have very well explained all the problems that we have been facing by these international media outlets. But what options do we have as a nation or as a state?
Meanwhile, government is obviously looking at it from various angles, and there are steps being taken to improve the relationship with these social media companies, while ensuring that we don't take any step that actually can compromise our national interests. Um, I mean, there are things done at various levels, and but I think we need to be a little more coordinated. PTA, IT Ministry, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the new digital media wing, they just need to coordinate a little more, come up with a consolidated and coordinated strategy of how to deal with these companies. And I think it's very important right now that a line of communication is developed between all the companies. I mean, right now, some companies talk to the government very frequently, and there are others who don't communicate that often. And I think there lies the problem. So I personally feel that this is something that is very easily doable. All they need to do is that there needs to be well coordinated and a properly thought out plan of how to go further.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salan, for your time and for your valuable input in this program. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a short break and we'll join you back in a while. Stay with us. There have been debates about the legal status of the problem of Kashmir. The Indian opinion makers and media experts believe that this is an internal Pakistan, and India and the global community has got nothing to do with it. It's a bilateral legal issue. But Pakistan has a very different perspective of it. So we wanted to discuss the legal angle of the crisis of Kashmir. And for that, we requested two eminent legal experts on the international arbitration issues. With me, I have Amir Bilal Sufi, an eminent lawyer and legal expert, and I have Nasir Qadri, advocate. Both are joining me over the phone. I'm coming to you, Amir Bilal Sufi. My first question from you is that the Indians believe that the United Nations resolutions is not a binding document. It is not a governing text for India. How would you comment on this, please?
The resolutions on Kashmir are the most powerful evidence that Kashmir is a disputed territory and that it needs to be resolved. They have not been set aside, they have not been altered by any subsequent resolution. They have not been amended specifically. And even the Secretary General of United Nations, when he was visiting Pakistan, had mentioned them as the governing text for the disposition of the Kashmir issue. In addition to that, we also have him saying more recently, a few days back, that he is prepared to mediate as well. So, United Nations continue to remain engaged with the issue of Kashmir, and any responsible state which issues to resolve issues between its neighbors can have resort to United Nations mechanism, including the Office of the Secretary General. Unfortunately, India has not been uh, suggesting going down the route of negotiations with Pakistan on Kashmir issue, which is so unfortunate because that is how mature states, responsible states, resolve their issues. Instead, it has been introducing legislation in Indian occupied Kashmir that has been counterproductive and that has been actually altering the status of the dispute by unlawfully claiming, for example, the title to the territories of Indian occupied Kashmir and even claiming title to occupation area. And yet, all this is in violation of not only the international law, bilateral agreements, but also in violation of the Constitution of India. And Indian lawyers themselves have been writing various articles against this against this legal development, as judging it to be ultra vires the Constitution of India. Now, what Pakistan can do is to highlight the inherent illegality of this move and also inherent illegality, equity of various legislation, including domicile law that has been introduced in Kashmir. The legal developments that Indian government has introduced have not been recognized or accepted or appreciated by international community. No capital has appreciated them. No capital, no country has endorsed them. On the contrary, there has been a serious skepticism on the manner in which Indians are treating Kashmiris and the territory of Kashmir that is under their unlawful occupation on the ground that right to self-determination is a right which is inherent in the UN Charter and needs to be addressed in cases of Kashmir and Palestine both.
Thank you very much, Amir Bilal Sufi, for being with me. And now I am coming to you, Nasir Qadri, advocate. You have enough exposure of this problem and you have written already a lot about it. Tell me how the Article 370 and 35A were helping the people of Kashmir and what legal difference they have brought to the life of the people of Kashmir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much. Let me tell you first thing. This Article 370 or 35A, they were the constitutional arrangements pursuant to this legal dispute. Whether Article 335 or 370 is there or it is not there, it doesn't matter at all because Kashmir is a disputed territory. Its fate would be decided. There would be a free and impartial plebiscite. But yes, the revocation of Article 370, it was not only it is a kind of a military operation, a well-planned military operation to change the demographic status of the territory.
But Nasir, tell me, could in presence of the agreements that are already in place, like Shimla Agreement, could India actually take this out unilaterally?
Not only the Shimla Agreement, you have to see the judicial precedents available on the matter. And the modus operandi, the legal requirements, the constitutional requirements, they didn't follow those requirements. There are already judicial precedents that this Article 370 or 35A, these provisions cannot be amended. So they didn't follow it. I'm telling you, it was simply a military operation. They didn't follow the constitutional mandate, their own constitution.
I understand that. But Mr. Nasir, what options do we have as Pakistan at the moment? We are not going for any aggressive acts from her, and we have always been a peace-loving nation. We are exploring all the diplomatic options. But what legal remedies are available to us to help the people of Kashmir?
Exactly. This is very important and a relevant question. Let me tell you, occupied territory, which has been annexed unlawfully, unilaterally, you can take recourse of this advisory opinion on this particular matter. If you fear a backfire on the disputed nature, but at least you have a case available on this unilateral revocation, the demographic status, because you have precedents available, as rightly said by Amar Bilal Sofi. The situation is akin to that Israeli case. We can invoke the advisory opinion to ICJ. We have a good remedy available, particularly on this matter, post 5th August 2019.
But have we so far expedited this option? Have we even thought of it seriously?
I believe there are people who are just examining the issue. They're evaluating. I believe they're doing. Foreign Office or the relevant quarters that they're doing.
Okay, so tell me about this human rights violation now happening in Kashmir. There are use of pellet guns on civilian population. People are becoming blinded. There are rapes. There are crimes of every type. And are technically these the war crimes? Can the people of Kashmir, through Pakistan or through some other via media, seek help from any international court in this regard?
Let me tell you one thing. The Kashmir, though, is a disputed territory, but one angle is very important. Let us not see Kashmir merely an human rights problem. The Kashmir problem invokes the law of wars, because Kashmir is one of the longest occupation in the modern history. So the military with their operations, they're doing the war crimes, not only this human rights violation, not only the pellet gun, which is a lethal weapon, or the banned weapon. You have an unmasked graves, the use of chemical weapons, and then if you see, if someone is martyred, they're not giving the dead bodies. These are the grave. And the act of 2019 is itself an act of aggression, which is again which already invokes this Rome Statute. The problem is much bigger than the human rights. It's an hostile armed conflict.
Nasir, you're right about the way you have presented all of this case from the legal aspect. But tell me one last thing, and that is that when the people of Kashmir do not have access to the media, they do not have access to the newspaper, to the internet, is this in itself a legal violation of the basic human rights, or is there something that can be done about it to address this issue? Because unless we do not hear back from the people of Kashmir, how long can we, fight their case? We don't know what is happening on ground actually.
The situation of Kashmir, this is not only the violation of the human rights. I'm telling you, both the humanitarian crisis is there. India is blatantly violating the law of war there, humanitarian laws. They are signatory to the conventions, Geneva Convention. They have gone excess, violating human rights laws, humanitarian laws, their own domestic laws.
Thank you very much, Nasir Qadri, for being with me. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll now take a break and we'll join you with some more guests in our studio and we'll discuss this issue further. Welcome back to the program. With me, I have in studio Sayyid Mujahid Gilani from the family of Sayyid Ali Gilani. He is a human rights activist and an expert on the affairs of Kashmir. And we are today going to talk about the life of an ordinary citizen of Kashmir. How does this all that we have seen so far or discussed so far transforms into or translates into the miseries of a common man in Kashmir? Dr. Mujahid, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tell me first of all about the economy. We have seen in a research paper that I was studying for this program that there are losses of $2 billion for this small economy. How does this translate into the miseries of a common man living on the grassroots?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. See, your question is very pertinent. Whenever we talk about any area, any conflict zone, we talk of a broader picture. A broader picture tells us that yes, there has been loss of almost 2 billion US dollars. But when we funnel it down to a common Kashmiri man, let me give you a few examples to it. We have Dal Lake almost in the middle center of the Srinagar city. And we have the Dal Lake harbors houseboats. We commonly call them as shikaras. Almost 2,000 of the houseboats. See the connection to it now. Whenever you wish to go to the Dal Lake, you want to enjoy a ride on the houseboat or the shikara, or you want to buy some vegetables that actually those shikara people hold upon. You need to have a taxi. You need to go, hire a taxi, go to the Dal Lake, and the Dal Lake essentially becomes a taxi stand as well. After the 5th of August 2019, this economy loss is actually translated into a crippling household economy. And that is what has happened to the household, those shikara people over there. No vegetables. They cannot sell it to the people. Nobody comes to them. It's a state of curfew. It's a state of military siege. Then the taxi stands. The taxi people, they actually cannot move from one place to the other because of the increased number of police nakas or police chowkis over there.
Dr. Saab, the tourism industry that was a mainstay for the Kashmir economy might also have gone down. So would be the agriculture. I was studying that 20,000 hectare of land is under the control of military now, and there is no land available for vegetation. How are the Kashmiris bearing all of this?
See, as far as the Kashmiri farmers or the village side is concerned, we must understand that Kashmir is known for its apples, for its walnuts, for its saffrons as well. Back in 2019, when there was a blanket curfew over all the whole valley of state of Jammu and Kashmir too, the farmers were actually offered by the government that sell your apples, your crops to us on a little higher price, and then we will give you the money to whatsoever. But see, the Kashmiri resilience stands over here. The farmers simply rejected that offer. The crops, the apples, whatever they had grown went into a waste and was not sold in the last year. This is the resilience and this is the resistance that is posed by the Kashmiri farmers.
How worried are you about this domicile law that is now allowing the people living in other parts of India to come and become citizens of Kashmir?
This domicile law is not a new thing. Let me be honest about it. The concept of Kashmiriyat that dates back even to Atal Bihari Vajpayee or even before that, Kashmiriyat starting from Nehru's time, is a concept that tells the Kashmiri that you have to be a good person. Anybody who comes from an outside state, who's a non-Kashmiri, you have to be hospitable to him. You have to be very welcoming. And this idea was infused in the Kashmiris that if you don't do that, you're not a good Kashmiri at all. And this transformed into a good Kashmiri is only a dead Kashmiri. But today, the Kashmiris who are not going to welcome the outsiders, the people, the RSS ones or anybody who is not a Kashmiri actually but is given a domicile of Kashmir, settles down into Kashmir and is not welcomed, the Kashmiris will be labeled as you're not a good Kashmiri at all. This concept of Kashmiriyat has actually been infused and taught into the Kashmiris. And today, we as Kashmiris are actually very much concerned about it, with the Home Ministry of India stating that almost 30 lakh domiciles have been issued till now, in a valley that harbors almost 80 million people, 80 lakh people in Jammu and Kashmir. So that is something that we believe an illegal demographic change will make us a minority.
Well, as an expert, what do you think the situation is leading toward? Because I generally believe, that's my personal opinion, that when Indian government came in with this new law, they did not wanted their forces to stay in such tense posture for such a long. They wanted the population to eventually digest the situation, but it has not been de-intensified so far. How long do you think this can keep going on like this?
See, let us understand the Kashmiri uprising that we have seen and witnessed in 2008, then in 2010, then in 2016. It was from the masses. It was never actually led by some leader. Although, yes, we had our leaders, the most renowned leaders, they were leading the struggle. But after 2016, we don't really see the leaders out on the roads because all of them were incarcerated in Tihar jail, Udhampur or house arrests. So, Indian design was very, very clever. It's to replace the masses, the people who were resisting The Muslims or the Kashmiri Muslims who were resisting, just simply replace them. Replace them with the Hindu majority, the people who have a Qatar or a staunch Hindutva ideology, replace the Kashmiri Muslims with them. So once they're replaced, there is not going to be any resistance.
Dr. Mujahid, tell me about the Kashmir leadership. You know these people very well. You are more familiar to their culture. With this entire leadership not being on the screen, where is it all leading to? And also tell us about your prominent leaders and about their state since 2019 onwards.
Once again, your question will lead to an explanation of how India has designed all this. We know that our leaders over there, who are the voices of the people, have always led the people. India made sure that before the abrogation of both the articles, India will incarcerate them, get them house arrested, or get them shifted from Srinagar, just like India did with Sayyida Asian Rabi, Fahmida Sufi, Nahida Nasreen, Yasin Malik, Masrat Alam Bhatt, Dr. Qasim Faktu, even Shabir Shah, even at this time, they're all lodged in the New Delhi Tihar jail, Dr. Qasim in Udhampur jail as well. Sayyid Ali Gilani, of his old age, he's house arrest for the past almost 11 years. And Mirwais Maulvi Umar Farooq is in a house arrest as well. So the leadership at this point in time, the struggle that is going on in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir is essentially in the hands of the youth. It's divided and based upon communities. It's that community, it's this mohalla, it's this region. Every region has its own freedom struggle that is going on. But all of these freedom struggles translate into one single thing. That is, India must leave Kashmir. That is, go India, go back. Every single Kashmiri, even those Kashmiris who may have had a pro-India stance earlier or not even a pro-freedom stance, are now completely against India for once. This is one thing important. The second thing is that we must understand that the Kashmiri leadership over there has always trickled the sense of the right to freedom of speech into the youth, into the masses. After the 2016, after the martyrdom of Burhan Wani, as we know, it has been the youth who has led this movement. And those youth, even if we name them, the pellet victims, for example, starts from Insha, a young girl who was doing her matriculation, who wanted to become a doctor, and then other pellet victims as well, who have been aging from like 10 to 25 years. These are the ages of our pellet victims. And then not only those pellet victims, the students who have been migrating or have been going into India or other countries for studying, whenever they have come back, they have come back with the same mindset that India must leave Kashmir. And that is why they're called into the police stations every week for question and answer. Who was the one who supported you for your education? Where did you stay? How did you meet your needs? These are the questions that a common Kashmiri student faces almost on daily basis.
Doctor, with this happening to the people on grassroots and internet not being available to them, how are these movements happening? How are these communications happening? And how much it is linked to the absence of internet? Is the Indian government afraid that by opening internet, the people will be interconnected to each other and all of this will transform into a collective revolt from the society?
See, let's be clear about it. It was 5th of August 2020. I remember I was talking to a few colleagues and friends of mine back in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And let me be clear about it. We had decided to launch a hashtag back in the valley. And we were able to do that. Unfortunately, those friends of mine got arrested. Not only arrested, they were made to delete their Twitter handles, and in fact they were admins of a few WhatsApp groups as well. Those WhatsApp groups were common Kashmiri groups, just deliberating about the news, about what's happening in Kashmir, but they were arrested even for that. At this point in time, the freedom struggle in Jammu and Kashmir does not really need some directions and visions. The people over there have a very clear vision about what they need to do. Their destination is pretty much clear. They do not want a colonialistic ruler over them. They do not want the Indian hegemony over them. And that's the simplest destination. Whatever helps and aids them in achieving that destination, they avail it.
Doctor, tell me, if this keeps going on like this, and if the Indian military stays in this aggressive posture, if the people are deprived of their basic rights, what do you think the situation will eventually lead to a few years down the road?
That is a saddening answer, perhaps, to your question. See, the problem is that the people are very much clear that yes, we do want freedom, and the cost of resistance that we are paying at this time is very much high. Be it via the cultural occupation, be it the educational occupation, the military occupation, the economic crippling of the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, we are paying a very high price. For us, the people living in the Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, we have been pushed against the wall. We're not going to worry about whether we are going to achieve our destination or not. For us, it's the present. We have to resist. We live because we resist. We die for freedom. And that is the only thought that we have at this time. It is for the people living outside the Jammu and Kashmir. It is for the free world, the international world, the people who actually hold the beacon of right of freedom of speech, the people who actually talk about human rights. They need to talk about Kashmir and understand that just in over the past 18 months, over 100 women were raped. Nobody talked about them. Do we know about them? Do we know the names? Nobody does that. Do we know that almost 1,700 Kashmiris were maimed and injured just over the past 6 months? Do we know about whether they were provided hospital facility or not? Do we know that the doctors over there are being at this point in time restricted, that you will not be treating every single Kashmiri, particularly the ones who come into the hospital with pellet victims?
Thank you very much, Dr. Mujahid, for being on my show and for your valuable insights
I'm really
about
grateful.
Kashmir.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard all of this and we realize that Kashmir stays to be the flashpoint between India and Pakistan. As said by Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan in UNGA, if this is not sorted out with the intervention of international bodies, with the intervention of United States or United Nations, the end of the day, this will lead to a major human crisis. Stay with us until next week and we'll come with another program. We'll highlight another issue, and until then, Allah Hafiz.